Hello, my friends. This is Deepak Chopra again, and we are continuing our series on science, spirituality, non dualism, fundamental reality, whatever you want to call it. And today I have a very special guest. His name is Harish Wallace. Right next to me is his book, The Recognition Sutras. This is a hardcover collector's item, but the paperback is available online. I'm sure you can check it out on Amazon. And then here is his other book, Tantra Illuminated. And I've been reading both these books, and I'm just blown away by this gentleman's erudition, scholarly work, understanding of Sanskrit language, and a deep, deep understanding into the nature of reality. So, Harish, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, nice. So, where are you right now?
In the beautiful hill country of central Portugal, where I have a retreat center that's actually just opening, right? We meant to open it earlier, but COVID and all happened. And so we're actually holding our first retreat here next week. So we're excited about that.
You have beautiful paintings in the background and some amazing icons. Explain them. Just what are these symbols? What did they represent?
Yeah, so these are icons of Hindu deities, specifically tantric deities. Well, the paintings are tantric goddesses, um, and they're esoteric goddesses, meaning they're not part of the Hindu mainstream. So I could tell you their names, but they're actually semi-secret goddesses.
I
Um, but we also have Shiva in his Dakshinamurti form, very popular in South India. And we have, of course, Ganesh, who's very well-known icon. And in the tradition that I study, the tradition of Tantra, they are considered icons of essence, meaning icons of our very own essence nature, rather than separate beings or supernatural entities. They represent and embody and express aspects of our own essence nature. And there are so many deities in Tantra because there are so many beautiful aspects to our essential nature. So that's what you're seeing there in the background on the
that,
altar.
that's very beautifully expressed. I was a disciple of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and I traveled with him and sat with him in satsang and heard his sermons. And he used to explain them as aspects of our own self, as symbolic representations of divine essence, as you said, but with a particular motif, a particular story, a particular theme, and that if we embodied these in our physical body, in our mental body, then we could become capable of the extraordinary superpowers of these. If we did that through humility, and instead of worshiping them, invoked their essence and their energy and their form and their story and their motif, then they would incarnate and express themselves through us. Would you say that's fair? That's a fair assessment of archetypes, deities, higher beings, that they're extensions of pure consciousness, but with a particular theme or motive or understanding.
Yes, yes. One way I would say it is that they are vibrations of the one consciousness, like different flavors, as it were. So just like ice cream comes in so many flavors, consciousness comes in all these flavors we call deities, gods and goddesses. But as you said, they're icons of our very own essence nature, aspects of our own true self, if you want to call it that. But also they represent forces in the universe, not just within us. So it's actually not sufficient to consider them psychological archetypes in a Jungian sense. They're much more than that, you know. For example, Lakshmi represents the principle of abundance and prosperity, and she also represents the laws of economics. And the laws of economics are something greater than oneself, right? So in this way, all the deities actually represent and embody aspects of the pattern of existence, as well as aspects of our own inner nature. And that's a really important principle of Tantra, actually, that everything outside is mirrored within, and everything within is mirrored outside. So the deities must then represent aspects of each of us and aspects of the wider universe.
Yeah, well, that's a
Yeah.
great extension of what I said, and beautifully said again. Maharishi, and I don't want to dominate this conversation. I want to get the best from you. But Maharishi used to use the words Rishi, Devata, and Chandas, and the Samhita of Rishi, Devata, and Chandas. So Rishi is the seer, Devata is the divine manifestation, as the seer projects itself as the scenery. So the seer is Rishi, Devata, and Chand, whatever he experiences, form and phenomena, they're all embodied in that pure infinite consciousness. And so Devata is divine manifestation, as we know,
Mm-hmm.
also perception, which creates the experience of the physical universe. And perceptual activity is divine activity, as is everything else, if we understand what you're teaching. But leave that aside right now. I actually want to know a little bit. We're going to discuss these themes, if you're willing, and create maybe a series with you. But I'd like to know a little bit. I'd like our audience to know a little bit about you. Where did you grow up? How did you get into Sanskrit? I actually want to also ask you some questions that have, you know, agonized over for years about language. But I'll come to that later. Let's get our audience to know a little bit about you. You look amazingly young to me for such a wise scholar. How old are you, by the way?
48.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm 74, going on 75 this year. Biologically, I don't feel that, but I'm in great admiration of you as a scholar. Tell us about your life a little bit.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest of the US, and my life started to look a bit different from most Americans from about the age of 7, because one of my parents took me to meet an Indian guru. Well, he wanted to meet the Indian guru, my father, and they both ended up meeting him. But my father took me along for the ride, as it were, and I met this Indian guru named Swami Muktananda, who
Yeah.
made a big impression on me as a 7 or 8-year-old. And I had my first mystical experience, actually, which was very surprising, because people started singing this mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, a traditional Indian mantra in Sanskrit language. And at that time, I never heard Sanskrit before. I never heard the word guru before, let alone met one. Nothing, It was all brand new. I was just an American kid. And as soon as I heard this mantra for the first time, I closed my eyes spontaneously, and I saw before me in my mind's eye a vision of a beautiful, wise man, a beautiful being of pure wisdom, but he was made completely of scintillating blue light, this beautiful, sparkling blue light, and seemed to have great wisdom and like a long beard and stuff. And it's really fascinating to me because at the time I didn't think anything. I was just a kid. I was like, oh, I saw a cool blue man. But years later, I read in the primary sources of the Indian tradition, I read that this is a traditional vision called the Nila Purusha, the blue person or the blue being. That you have this vision sometimes when you're destined for that spiritual path. So it's amazing because for many years after that, I didn't get involved in it, actually. My mother became a very faithful practitioner of Hindu spirituality. And I thought it was too weird, as teenagers do, right? I became a preteen and then a teen, and I was like, this is too weird for me. Keep it out of sight, Mom. And then, when I was 16, I met another Indian guru, a female guru, Guru Mai, and she made a big impression on me. And this time I was old enough to actually become interested in the practice. So it was 8-9 years later, after I had that childhood vision, that I started to feel, wow, no, this is something I really want to be involved in. And I started, going to the meditation center in Seattle and becoming a practitioner. And then it wasn't until some years later I wanted to take another deeper step and actually study this beautiful tradition full time. So that's when I started academically studying, right? Because in the old days of ancient India, you could join what was called a Gurukula, and you could study spirituality and practice it in the same place. But in the US, if you want to study full time, you have to go to university. But luckily, there were a couple of professors of Hindu religion I met, who were also practitioners, because I wasn't interested in the dry, intellectual, purely academic study, right? I was interested in studying and applying to real life and actually having these experiences of awakening that the ancient scriptures talk about. So I was very lucky to meet a great scholar named Paul Muller Ortega, and several other great scholars, actually. He's just foremost amongst them. And I was able to study with him and these others full time, who were practitioners as well as academic professors of legitimate renown. And so that's something that meant a lot to me, is like, oh, how can I do this as a respectable career, as it were, but also be serious about the practice. So for a long time, I was on track to be a university professor. And that changed because of the explosion of yoga worldwide and the explosion of interest in yoga philosophy. I discovered that I could be a freelance teacher and do just as well or better for myself than being a university professor. So even though I came very close to being a university professor, I love the freedom of being a freelance teacher and teaching in yoga teacher trainings all over the world. And, just sharing these teachings of yoga philosophy and classical Indian spirituality with people who are practitioners, but who want to go deep with their practice, not just stay on that sort of surface level. So it's a really deeply rewarding career. I mean, I feel totally blessed because I get to just talk about what I love the most and share it with people and practice with people. And that's my career. So it's a very blessed life, I feel. And of course I have challenges too, like anyone does. But it's really extraordinary to live and study and teach these things full time.
So I had the good fortune actually of being with Guru Mai also many, many years ago. And I have a fond memory of her gifting me a beautiful Shiva Lingam after a talk that I gave at her ashram in upstate New York. And that memory is very important to me. But when did you get into Sanskrit as a language and study? How did you master Devanagari? It seems you know it better than most Indians.
Yeah, it started actually at Guru Mai's ashram in upstate New York that you mentioned. I met a Sanskritist who was visiting there, and I said, "Oh, can you please teach me?" And then when I went to university, I took it further, and my lust for knowledge, I would have to say, was so great that I went to several different universities to make sure I was getting the best instruction from the best teachers. So I ended up in Rochester, New York, in Berkeley, California, in Oxford, UK, in Santa Barbara, California, just studying from the best, really, the best instructors and professors I could find. So I was very fortunate to have just great teachers, both academically and spiritually. So, Sanskrit is a difficult language, but if you devote yourself to it full time, it only takes a few years to master the language if you have some facility for languages. And so it's really about the dedication. That's become very rare in modern India, as well as in the West, this kind of dedication you need. And it is one of those things that's 10,000 hours to mastery, Sanskrit's like that. But if you love it, like I did, and do it, it doesn't really feel like work. And really to be able to read the script, like you see, Sanskrit over my head as well, that is fun, but it's really to understand the meanings that are being expressed and be able to expound those meanings to yourself and others. That's the true reward, because these ancient scriptures written in the Sanskrit language are so profound and so powerful that it's said, and I believe it's true, that if you could totally understand, all the way deep down, totally understand even one sentence from these ancient scriptures, it would be all you need for complete spiritual awakening and liberation. So that was enough motivation for me.
See the Sanskrit behind you, Om Harim Shrim and Chaitanya Mahatma.
Exactly. Yes, Chaitanya Mahatma, which means consciousness is the soul of the universe, or you can translate it as the self of each being is indeed consciousness, right? The reality of selfhood is only consciousness. But this is what I mean. A sentence like this, you can contemplate it for years because you can read it several ways. Consciousness is the Atman, the soul of reality or the soul of the universe. But also, it's also saying the only truth to the notion of selfhood, to the notion of I, is consciousness. So the sutra is implying that it's not all the things you think about yourself that constitute yourself. Your thoughts are not yourself. I am so-and-so, and I have these good qualities and bad qualities and everything. That is part of the contents of consciousness. But your selfhood is defined only by pure consciousness itself, the capacity to be aware. And so that is infinitely profound statement that we could discuss for the next 6 hours, no problem.
Chaitanya Atma Om Harim Sharim. Beautiful and beautifully expressed. Yes. So here's something I have been struggling with. As I mentioned, I'm going to be 75 at the end of this year. And I'm entering the fourth ashram of my own life. I spent the first 25 years becoming a doctor. And then the second 25 years, thanks to destiny, becoming famous and acquiring what people would call a fortune. The third 25 years, in a sense, hoping to give back. And I hope I've done that through my nonprofit and other efforts and, exploring reality with scholars like you. And now I entered the fourth phase this year. And my only intention right now for the world and for myself is seva, which is, as you know, service, sadhana, spiritual practice, and sangha, which is what we're doing right now and sharing with the world. Taking refuge in the Buddha, taking refuge in the Dharma, taking refuge in the Sangha. But here's what has kind of bothered me, but now I'm seeing the light a little bit as my own awakening is happening, and I believe it is very clearly in that I'm not bamboozled by perceptual constructs or by language even, or by what is called naive realism in science. I'm not bamboozled by that. I'm grounded in my being, and I can see through the veil of ignorance. But one of the things that, along the way that I wanted to question you about, because, we say that silence is the highest pure knowing. At least that's my experience also when I go into silence. And I've traditionally taken a week of silence every year, and sometimes longer, with Maharishi even longer sometimes. When he used to go into silence, I would join, even if I was not there, but I would go into silence as well. And for me, that was when I experienced bits and pieces of what you call revelation or awakening and glimpses of um, unbounded reality, all of that. And of course, we are all familiar with the great Indian sages taking Maun Brat, as they say, and the revelations that come out of them, whether it's Ramana Maharishi or many others that we've known throughout the ages. Rumi said, God's language is silence, everything else is poor translation. So for me, that was the means. But then I read stuff, and that stuff is language. Okay, you've already come out from the silence, and we also know the sequence of the unfoldment of silence: para, pashanti, madhyama, vaikhari, and how it unfolds. Silence unfolds into thought and speech and action and all that. So language already is a disruption in pure knowing or pure knowledge. So then I asked myself, if we created language, then, are we kind of disrupting the spontaneous knowing that comes from samadhi or pure silence? And that troubled me a lot. For a time, I stopped reading. I stopped reading altogether. Then I had the revelation that if all is consciousness and there is only consciousness, then consciousness must have created language. It's not we who created language. Consciousness created language. And so consciousness knows, or awareness knows itself as the knower, the process of knowing, and that which is known. But then maybe consciousness wants to explain to itself through language. And so consciousness created language, not humans. Consciousness created language because there's only consciousness, and humans are one species specific expression of consciousness. So then I became comfortable with the idea of language as a means to enlightenment. And you spoke about, the blue being, Neil, what did you use the word?
Nila Purusha. Yeah.
Neil Purusha, Neil Kantha, this Neil coming from here, Saraswati. So is this the language of Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom?
Yeah, you raise a really important point, because it's absolutely true that you cannot think your way to enlightenment. And so the study of philosophy as such does not avail a seeker of the path of awakening, However, here's what the Indian tradition has to say about this, which is really remarkable. And it's not only the Indian tradition. We find this teaching in others as well. But the idea that somebody who has already awakened, when they utter words that arise spontaneously from that awakened state, the contemplation of those very words helps others glimpse and even recognize and even embody that same awakened state. So such words are not mere philosophizing, or intellectualism or speculation. They are spontaneous, ecstatic expressions of the awake mode of existence, and they're impregnated with this unique power to take us beyond thought. And that's really what's amazing about tantric philosophy in particular. It's said to be the thorn you use to pluck out another thorn. This is an old proverb, like if you get a thorn stuck in your foot, you use another thorn to pluck it out. And in the same way, if you are studying the language and thoughts of the awakened ones, then that actually takes you beyond thought altogether. So this is a different kind of language in that sense. So it's that fundamental principle. And you cited the 4 levels of speech earlier, which are
Explain them
explained.
to our audience. I think you would do a very good job of explaining these 4 levels of
Yeah,
speech. So please do.
they're explained in more depth in my book, but briefly, the most superficial level of speech is the one that you're hearing right now, dear listener, the words that I'm articulating with my vocal tract, right, in the English language. This is the most superficial layer of speech called Vaikari in Sanskrit. So whether it's Sanskrit or English, doesn't matter. It's still the most superficial level because words are reductionistic and words are inherently dualistic, right? But there's a deeper level, which is this madhyama. We can take these words, especially again, if we're taking the words of the awakened ones, we can take them inside and sort of marinate in them, right? And just sort of soak our mind in these words. Even if we don't understand them, we turn these words over and over in our mind and
Just
we
like
sit with them.
just like the words right there, Chaitanya Atma.
Yes,
Yeah, you marinate.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Exactly. You take one of these sutras and you marinate in it, and it starts to work within you, right? It has its own power actually because it arose spontaneously from the consciousness of a fully awakened being. And so then after a while at that level, it goes deeper. It goes to this pashyanti level, right? And so the pashyanti level is almost like the level of dreams and the subconscious, but it's also the level of deeply internalized knowledge. So when it reaches that level, it starts to inform your vision of reality. Pashyanti literally means viewing or visioning. And so it starts to shape the way you're experiencing reality. But then, and here's the important part, then you actually let go of the original teaching altogether because it has set you on a trajectory. It's set you on a course that lands you in reality itself. Because if we just cling to the teaching, no matter how sublime, then we don't get beyond conceptualization. Instead, we let it point our ship, as it were, our sailboat in one metaphor, and we go that direction. And then we go beyond the teaching itself to the direct experience which caused the teaching to be articulated in the first place. And that's this ultimate level, this paravak, non-conceptual, direct experience of the fundamental nature of reality, which gives rise to this expression of these beautiful teachings in the first place. And this holds out to us a fascinating possibility because most people think religion is about, believing the words of a prophet or a messiah. And here it's a completely different orientation. We take the words of the masters and we seek to discover within ourselves the very state of consciousness that caused them to utter those words in the first place. And that's a different project. It's a different endeavor. It's not religion, it's spirituality.
Para is pure knowing. Huh? Would you say para is pure knowing?
Yeah, paravak could be translated as the supreme word, like capital W word, but it really kind of means the deep, deep structure of reality, the inherent fundamental nature of reality prior to thought, but which makes all thoughts possible. So
Beautiful.
paravak, it's impossible to translate really, but it's kind of like the Greek concept of logos,
Correct.
so it is parallel to that a little bit.
So, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, my guru, was a Vedantist of the Shankaracharya tradition. And
Mm,
through him, I also um, encountered the teachings and the knowledge of Lakshman Ju when I first entered this whole arena, moving from
mhm,
Vedanta to understanding a little bit about Kashmiri Shaivism, reading the works of translations of the works of Abhinava Gupta, and two sutras stuck out at me in a way that they totally transformed me. One was meditate on your body as the universe and having the nature of awareness. That was, first time I heard that, it it just rang with truth to me. And then the other was you and the universe are awareness, and that's all you need to know. And so then I got interested in Shiva Sutras, and recently in your work, Recognition Sutras. Tell me what the Recognition Sutras are. Just let people go the first step. What are we talking about? Is this Smriti, Shruti? What is the Recognition
yes.
Sutra? What's the history? What's the background? And why did you write this book?
I will explain that. And first, I just want to comment on this extraordinary synchronicity, because if I could zoom in the camera more, you would see that this sutra here is actually Drishyam Shariram, which is the very sutra you just cited as taught to you by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. This is the universe is your body. Your body is the universe. All that is perceptible in this universe constitutes the body of consciousness, and you are consciousness. So these two sutras are the very two that your guru shared with you. Yeah,
That's
that's very, very beautiful.
synchronicity, which in itself is a sign that we're on the right track, right? The
Yeah,
synchronicity itself is an omen from the divine
yeah,
that we're on the right path. Now, tell me about the Recognition Sutras.
yes,
Why did you give that
absolutely.
name, and what are the Recognition Sutras? Let's go there.
Yeah. So, the tradition of classical Tantra, also known as Tantric Shaivism, was widespread throughout all of India and Southeast Asia as well at one time, but was kind of wiped away by the conquests and colonialism and everything. But before all that, it was flourishing everywhere, not just in Kashmir. So we have this kind of misnomer. Kashmir Shaivism implies it was only flourishing in Kashmir. It was actually everywhere in India. But in Kashmir, we had these incredible authors and writers and philosophers, right? So 1,000 years ago in the Valley of Kashmir, there was this kind of efflorescence of great thinkers and practitioners and sages and masters. And it was really considered a kind of golden era for the tradition. In the deep south as well, by the way, in Kerala and Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, but in Kashmir too. And the author of the Recognition Sutras lived in Kashmir exactly 1,000 years ago. In fact, he was at the peak of his career in 1020, 1021, literally exactly 1,000 years ago. And his name was the King of Contentment. That was his spiritual name, Kshemaraja, the King of Contentment. And he was the foremost disciple of the great Abhinavagupta, who you've already mentioned. Who was the greatest tantric master of all time. And so Kshemaraja, this great scholar sage, he composed the Recognition Sutras. And there was already a tradition at that time of the what's called the philosophy of recognition, or pratyabhijna in Sanskrit. The philosophy of recognition means the philosophy of how to recognize yourself as the divine, how to recognize that you are God. and of course, not just you, all beings, right? All beings are a direct expression and manifestation of the one infinite divine intelligence, which gives rise to the whole pattern of existence. So the recognition school sought to teach people how to recognize themselves as divine, which of course is a very different experience from the experience most people have, even if they've heard this teaching, oh, you are God, you know, in their yoga studio, whatever. Most people experience, I am just a pathetic, you know, little nothing in this big, wide, scary universe. And it's because they're identified with their conditioning. They're identified with their body, mind, and its thoughts and their cultural conditioning. So the recognition school teaches us how to release that identification without any denialism or spiritual bypassing, to simply release that identification and come to rest in our true, deepest, innermost nature as divine consciousness. So this philosophy was considered too abstruse by many people at the time, too subtle, too difficult. So Kshemaraja wrote these sutras that you have displayed there, the recognition sutras, to make it easier for people, right? So he composed 20 sutras summarizing the recognition philosophy. And these sutras are luminous. They're absolutely magical, powerful, impactful, and they do come from this deepest state of awakening that he embodied. And of course, if you just hear one of the sutras by itself, then you might not realize its power at first. For example, Sutra number 1 of the Recognition Sutras is Chitti Swatantra Vishvasiddhi Hetuhu, which means consciousness is absolutely free and independent in its real nature, and it is the cause of the manifestation or the magic of the universe. It's beautiful, it's profound, but you don't realize the full depth of its profundity until you go through a process, a spiritual process of internalizing the wisdom that it points to, because the wisdom it points to is actually wordless, it's non-conceptual. But we use words, as I said before, to penetrate to the non-conceptual. And so how do you do that exactly? What are the steps? Well, that's what's in the book, right? So Kshemaraja explains his own sutra. He gives a commentary on his own sutra, and then I explain it further, right? So I wrote the commentary on the commentary, as it were, but it's all laid out in a way that's accessible for a modern reader, because this book, I thought I wanted to translate this book most of all because it was written as a primer, meaning it was written as an introductory text to map the whole spiritual path in 20 sutras, 20 aphorisms, to map the whole spiritual path from beginning to end. And it does. It's extraordinary. It's the most kind of high octane work, meaning the ratio of signal to noise is incredible. There's not a single wasted word. And so when you read this book, you're reading a map of the whole spiritual path, how consciousness manifests a universe of experience for itself, gets lost within that universe, forgets itself temporarily, becomes contracted, and then remembers itself and integrates that realization of its true nature into embodied experience. It's the whole map. So it's really, really wonderful to have this in a readable form. Now, I got to admit, this has been translated before, once before. I did my translation, but in a form not readable to most people. It's written in mid 20th century Indian English, which many Indian readers are fine with, but Westerners cannot wrap their heads around. So this is a modern English explanation of the work. And I also cite a lot of parallel passages, meaning passages from related scriptures that help us understand the base text more fully. So that's why, even though the original scripture is only 50 pages, my book is 400 pages, but I think the reader will find it's, you need that much to really explain it clearly and simply. And I know you've read the whole thing, I believe, or most of it anyway.
Yes, more than once. So I'm thrilled to be talking to you. So as I heard you explain the first sutra, the insight I had is that consciousness is intrinsically free of its modifications, which we call vrittis, which are basically sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts that we then conceptualize as mind, body, and universe. And these vrittis are, on-off, evanescent fluctuations of consciousness that ultimately create the appearance not only of the subtle body, the physical body, but the physical universe, the appearance. And so
Correct.
in a sense, consciousness is modifying itself into these appearances which have no fundamental reality. And consciousness, even as it modifies itself as those, but when we identify with them, then we become the prisoner of the veil of ignorance or Maya. Is that a fair assessment of what you just said?
Not only a fair assessment, but beautifully said, very accurately said. That's exactly it. Is that what this tradition is teaching us is that most people think I need to change something about my life or situation to feel free. And perhaps that's a good idea to change something about your life, but that's not required to feel free, because freedom is intrinsic to consciousness itself. If any of us simply learns to release identification with the thoughts and feelings and images that appear in consciousness, images like body and world, right? And actually come to rest in your true nature, you discover it's intrinsically free and even has an intrinsic capacity for joy, the ability to simply enjoy being, enjoy existence, no matter what's happening. And we know this is true because people who spiritually awaken in this way experience freedom and joy even in a prison cell, literally. So if you can experience total freedom and joy there, you can experience it wherever, whatever your life is, right? So in this tradition, we say, no, first realize yourself, realize your true nature, and then let whatever changes naturally happen in your life as a result of that realization, let them all unfold. But most people are going about it all wrong, trying to change something in their life. Like, I need more money in my bank account. I need more lovers. I need more likes on Facebook, and then I'll be happy. And that is a no-win scenario because it's never worked for anyone ever, because it's this attempt to manipulate your environment and your experience that just reinforces the false sense of selfhood, the false sense of control, instead of relaxing into the level of your being that's already free and joyful. That's the key to the teaching. You don't have to manufacture peace of mind. You learn to relax and slip out of conditioned thought into the level of your being that's already completely joyful and peaceful. And then all your apparent problems, or most of them anyway, they evaporate. You see, oh, I was making these problems in my own mind. I was labeling things as problems that don't need to be so labeled. And whatever real problems remain, the solutions simply reveal themselves as part of the natural flow of life. And it's literally a different paradigm of existence. And the irony is it's available to everyone, and very few people discover it, because the whole culture, there's a cultural conspiracy, I would even say, because our economy is driven by consumption. And the only way to get everyone to keep consuming is to give them the message, you'll finally be happy when you consume enough, when you consume enough experiences, and enough material goods. And that myth has to be perpetuated to keep the economy running, which is a tragedy because it requires the concealment of the key to happiness and joy in life. So I do think we'll have to find another way as a species, sooner or later. because we can't keep on with a system whose primary requirement is that the secrets to happiness and joy in life are concealed to most people most of the time.
Beautifully said again. So, we're close to running out of time on our first session. I hope you'll join me for many more so we can explore each of these sutras
Wonderful.
in depth. And starting again next time with the first sutra, because we didn't really go deeply into it, although we addressed it. But before I let you go, and we have only less than 10 minutes because otherwise we won't be able to post this for technical reasons. So I'm just going to ask you very briefly define certain words which are very germane to everything that you're teaching. Mantra.
Yeah, so mantra in the West these days.
Let me stop you there. Mantra, yantra, tantra, all of them, because they are the key. They're part of the rituals of tantra, right? So mantra, yantra, tantra, and then we can stop after that.
Yes. Yeah, great. So mantra in the West is often confused with affirmations, making a kind of affirmation, but traditionally a mantra is always in Sanskrit language because, and this is something most people don't understand, the whole point to a mantra is not what it means, but rather its vibration, its inherent vibration. So these mantras, or sacred utterances, are said to have spontaneously arisen in deep meditation. That is to say, they were revealed to the great masters and sages of meditation and of yoga. And so they have been passed down through centuries and even millennia in many cases. And it's said that every person who repeats a mantra with love and devotion and focus and dedication infuses that energy into the mantra as well and passes on the mantra with some of that energy. So these mantras that have been repeated for centuries with so much dedication and love, they come to us with that love infused in them, with that power of dedication infused in them. So in fact, if someone were to translate a mantra and repeat it in English, they would lose all of that, because a mantra is not a prayer. That's the key. It's not a thought even. It's actually a vibration, a condensed vibration of consciousness. And so mantras are key for the path of Tantra, which utilizes these sound vibrations in many, many, many different ways that we can talk about later. And corresponding to mantras, we have yantras, and yantras are sacred geometry, right? Mystical diagrams. And what's interesting, a lot of people don't know this, is that each yantra is a mantra in visual form. So there's this fascinating field I'm sure you know about called cymatics, which is the science of representing, not representing, expressing sound in visual patterns. Like if you put sand on a metal plate and vibrate tones underneath it, it spontaneously organizes itself into geometric patterns that look like mandalas or yantras. So these diagrams then are considered very powerful visual representations of fundamental pulsations of consciousness that help us access deeper and deeper levels of our own inner nature. So a traditional practice, for example, is to gaze at a yantra unmoving and repeat the corresponding mantra. But you must make sure, of course, you have the mantra that matches the yantra. And this is why people call these practices kind of pre-modern technologies that we use to hack consciousness, in fact. And that's really not exaggerated terminology at all. They are technologies. So why do these words all sound the same? Mantra, yantra, tantra, because the suffix tra is an instrumental suffix in Sanskrit. So a mantra is a tool for the mind, mantra, a tool for the mind that refines and empowers and clarifies and purifies the mind. And a yantra is a tool, a corresponding tool for channeling energy, because yan comes from yam, to channel. And
Tantra is
Tantra,
the ritual. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, Tantra has many meanings, but one of its meanings is a scripture. A tantric scripture is called a tantra, and that means a tool for expansion. Tan is to expand, and tra is a tool. So a tool for expanding awareness, expanding consciousness, expanding your experience of reality, right? So each of these scriptures is a tool for expansion, but Tantra also means the whole system, right? The whole system is this radical, innovative tool for expansion. And indeed, it's still relevant and cutting edge today in our time, as anyone who reads this stuff will discover.
So then Tantra is the whole body of knowledge. You're saying the whole body of this
Yes.
wisdom.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, Tantra can mean just the system, right? So people in the early days, it was still a secret, and people would like say, have you heard of the Tantra, the system for liberating consciousness, you know? Anyway, yes. So this is,
much like the Gnostic seers, right? The secret knowledge. Before I let you go, is Sri Yantra the yantra for Om? Sri Yantra.
No, actually.
Because that is the conversation in the ecosystem right now. The Sri Yantra is the visual representation of Om.
The Sri Yantra is the visual representation of a longer mantra, a 15-syllable mantra that is highly secret, but it's the Sri Vidya mantra. And so I'm not permitted to say that in this context.
Right. No problem.
Yeah.
Is Om its own yantra? I mean, the Om looks like a beautiful symbolic visual representation.
Well, Om is considered the pranava, right? So it's the fundamental pulsation of reality. It's you might even almost say it's like the vibration that pervades the whole universe from the Big Bang is analogous to Om. So it's the fundamental tonic. So it doesn't have its own yantra because the whole universe is the yantra of Om, actually. But when Om gets joined to a longer mantra, like Mahamrityunjaya mantra, then it has a yantra that goes with it.
Beautifully said. Your name is Harish. What does it mean?
Yeah.
I know what it means, but I want to.
This name was given to me by Swami Muktananda when I was a child. And there's two meanings. Actually, he gave the meaning remover of sorrows. But Harish also means Vishnu and Shiva in one. Hari and Isha. Yeah.
Oh, Isha. Yeah, I get it. Hari and Isha. So beautiful.